Hayır, ne yapıyorsunuz?
İmdat, durun!
My name is Margaret, but everyone calls me Maggie. I'm 62 years old, and what I'm about to share with you will turn everything you think you know about family loyalty upside down. Just 5 days ago, my own son Owen and my daughter-in-law Claire pushed my husband Robert and me off a 26-meter cliff on the Oregon coast. With broken bones, shattered ribs, and tasting my own blood, I heard my husband's trembling whisper, "Maggie, don't move. Play dead." But that wasn't the worst of it. The worst part was Robert revealing the most devastating truth a mother could hear. A secret our children had kept hidden for 25 years. A secret that had been slowly eating away at our family from the inside out. Before we dive deeper into this journey, I have a small request. Hit the subscribe button, like this video, and write in the comments what you want our next video to be about. Because on this channel, we don't just tell stories. We listen to each other. Each of you has a story waiting to be told in your heart. Perhaps your story will be a balm for someone else's wound. If you have a story you've been keeping inside, you can send it to the email address in the description section. Because sometimes the first step toward healing is simply to share. Let's go back to the beginning, because every strong ending deserves a fitting origin story. Robert and I believed we had built an unshakable family foundation over 40 years. Every morning, we woke up in our worn-out beach house, where the smell of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the salty air and the cries of seagulls. I worked as a librarian at the county library and came home every evening with stories about strange customers and rare books I had discovered. Robert had a furniture restoration workshop where he breathed new life into forgotten antiques. With his calloused but gentle hands, he could transform a broken Victorian chair into a museum-quality piece. He possessed a genuine talent that drew people from hundreds of miles away to experience it. We had 2 sons. Our first child was Thomas, and Owen was born 6 years later. Thomas was the light of our lives. He was always smiling, helping his father in the workshop, making sure I didn't work too hard. He had a way of making everyone feel special, as if they were the only person in the room. Owen was different. He was quieter, more withdrawn, but I loved him just as much. As a mother, you don't discriminate between your children. At least, that's what I told myself every day. On Sunday afternoons, after the farmer's market, the whole family would gather around the cedar dining table Robert had restored from a 1920s estate sale. Thomas would talk excitedly about his plans to study marine biology, his eyes sparkling as he described the research he wanted to do on coastal ecosystems. Owen, however, would sit pushing his food around on his plate, barely making eye contact. Life seemed simple, even beautiful. In the evenings, Robert and I would walk along the cliff path above our small town, talking about our dreams, watching our grandchildren grow up, growing old together in that house overlooking the Pacific. Maybe finally taking that trip to Scotland we always talked about. I never imagined that those evening walks would prepare me for the walk that would nearly end my life. On weekends, I hosted family gatherings with my sisters Dorothy and Ellen, their husbands, and children. The house would be filled with laughter, the children running on the beach below, the women sharing recipes in my sunny kitchen, while the men tinkered with Robert's boat in the garage. Robert was my soulmate. Even after 40 years of marriage, he still picked wildflowers along the coastal road on his way home from work. He helped me organize books to donate to the library, and I held furniture steady while he applied varnish in his workshop. We were partners, an inseparable team. At least, that's what I believed with all my heart. At night, we would sit on the porch surrounding our house, watch the sunset over the Pacific, and make plans for retirement. We talked about eventually moving to a smaller house, maybe buying a small RV and exploring the national parks, traveling around the country we had worked in our entire lives. But perfect happiness, as I would discover in the most horrific way, often hides the darkest tragedies imaginable. When Thomas turned 22, there was a shift in our family's energy. Owen and I began having heated arguments about things I couldn't fully understand. I would hear them whispering in the hallway, and they would fall silent the moment I appeared. Robert told me it was just sibling rivalry, that it would pass with time. I desperately tried to believe him, because I needed to believe our family was still solid, still whole. Exactly 25 years ago, one night in September, Thomas didn't come home for dinner. We waited until midnight, then 1 o'clock, then 2. Owen was supposed to be studying for midterms in his room, but when I knocked on his door to ask about his brother, I noticed something disturbing in his eyes. Something cold, something I'd never seen before. Robert went out searching with our neighbors, flashlights cutting through the fog along the shore. They checked every corner of town, every path, every tide pool Thomas loved to explore. At dawn, they found his body at the base of Widow's Peak, the dangerous rocky formation north of town. The police said it was an accidental fall. They said he probably slipped in the dark, and the rocks might have been slippery from ocean spray. I never questioned that explanation because to question it would have meant considering a much worse possibility, a possibility my heart refused to accept. Thomas's funeral was the darkest day of my life. I wore my only black dress, the same one I wore when we buried my father. Owen was disturbingly calm for someone who had just lost his brother. While I cried until I couldn't breathe, my sisters having to physically hold me back, he stood there with a stony face. And now, knowing everything, that expression sends a chill down my spine. Robert didn't leave my side all day, holding me when my legs gave out, whispering words of comfort that I now know tasted like poison on his lips. After Thomas's death, Owen changed completely. He became attentive, almost obsessively loving, as if desperately trying to fill a void. He helped me with the housework, spent hours in the workshop with his father, and brought me flowers when he saw I was having a particularly bad day. I thought this was his way of mourning, of taking on the role Thomas had left behind. How naive I was. What he was really doing was creating the perfect mask to hide the monster lurking beneath. Years passed, the wound never fully healed, but we learned to live with the pain. Owen married Claire, a sweet elementary school teacher from the neighboring county, and they seemed truly happy. They had 2 beautiful children, Emma and Jake. I finally felt that life had given us a second chance at happiness. Claire called me Mom and helped me with holiday preparations when they visited. Owen had inherited his father's talent for carpentry and started his own restoration business. Everything seemed to be falling into place. But now, lying at the bottom of this godforsaken valley with broken ribs and the metallic taste of my own blood on my tongue, I realized that all that happiness was a carefully constructed illusion, a lie we all lived. The first warning signs appeared about 8 months ago when Robert and I decided to update our estate plan. We had saved money carefully throughout our lives. Together with our home, the beach property I inherited from my family, and our retirement savings, we had accumulated about $240,000 to leave to our children and grandchildren. Owen was the first to bring up the subject. "Mom, Dad," he said, with that smile of his that now seemed completely infuriating, "you're both in your 60s now. It's very important to get everything legally in order." Claire nodded beside him, stroking my hand with the same fingers that would later push me to my death. "We love you both very much and just want to protect you," she added in her teacher's voice, softly and reassuringly. How foolish it was to interpret those words as genuine affection. Bernard, an elderly gentleman we'd known for 15 years, explained our options carefully. We could set up a living trust, divide the estate directly among Owen's children, or prepare a traditional will. Owen argued that when the time came, Emma and Jake would distribute everything fairly, and he strongly advocated appointing himself and Claire as sole beneficiaries and executors. "Also," he said, leaning forward with feigned concern, "you'll need us as you get older." It makes more sense to have immediate access to resources so we can take care of you properly when health issues arise. Something in his tone twisted my stomach uncomfortably, but Robert seemed convinced. My husband, more trusting than me, more inclined to see the good in people, accepted the offer without much resistance. I had some reservations, especially since I remembered Thomas always saying he planned to support us financially in our old age. My eldest son had concrete plans that would ensure we lived comfortably. But Thomas was dead, and Owen was our only surviving child. We signed the papers on a foggy Tuesday afternoon in March. I remember Claire wearing a beautiful lavender cardigan and giving me a big hug after the signing ceremony. "We're officially bound to each other forever now," she whispered in my ear. Her words gave me an inexplicable shiver that I couldn't understand at the time. Owen squeezed his father's hand with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. That night, as I prepared Robert's favorite dinner, oyster soup, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had made a terrible mistake. The following weeks grew increasingly strange. Owen and Claire began visiting us more often, but the nature of their visits had changed. They no longer came just to spend time with the family. They were always offering suggestions about how we should renovate the house, what investments we should make, what insurance policies we should purchase. "Mom," Claire said one afternoon as she scrutinized our antique furniture with calculating eyes, "you really should consider selling this huge house and moving somewhere more manageable. We can help you find a comfortable single-story apartment in the city." But I loved our house with all my heart. Every corner was filled with precious memories. Every room told the story of our 40-year marriage. The kitchen where I had prepared family meals thousands of times. Robert's workshop where he created his masterpieces. The garden where our children and grandchildren played. I couldn't imagine my life anywhere else. "What were they arguing about?" I whispered, even though a part of me didn't want to know the answer. Robert lifted his head, and I saw tears in his eyes, tears he hadn't shed even at our eldest son's funeral. "About the inheritance. About money." "Maggie," Owen was furious because Thomas was the eldest child, and according to family tradition, he would inherit most of our estate. But there was something else, something Thomas had discovered about the money. "What money?" I asked, feeling the solid ground beneath my feet disappear. Robert sighed deeply, as if from the depths of his soul. 3 days before he died, Thomas came to the workshop and talked to me. He had discovered that Owen was systematically stealing money from our family savings account. At first it was small amounts, $50 here, $100 there, but then it grew to larger sums. Thomas had been investigating for months. Bank statements, transaction records, everything was documented. My mind refused to accept what I was hearing. My youngest son, who had been so attentive and caring to us after Thomas's death, who had helped and protected us, had been stealing money from us even before his brother died. "Why didn't you tell me?" I accused Robert, the feeling of betrayal growing stronger. Because by the time I reached Widow's Peak that night, he replied in a hoarse voice, it was already too late. I saw Owen standing at the edge of the cliff next to Thomas's body. Our youngest son was trembling, crying uncontrollably, and repeating over and over, "It was an accident. Father, it was an accident." He came towards me, and I pushed him, and he just lost his balance. As tears streamed down my face, they mingled with the overwhelming sense of betrayal filling my heart. "But you knew it was a lie," I murmured, though I already knew the answer with devastating certainty. Robert slowly shook his head, the guilt etched on his face for decades. "He was my son, Maggie. My only surviving son was asking me for help, and Thomas was already dead. I couldn't bring one back to life by killing another. God help me, I truly believed it was an accident, that Owen had learned his lesson, that this tragedy would make him a better person." "What about the stolen money?" I pressed, wanting to know every horrific detail. Owen promised he would pay it back slowly. He swore he took the money to invest in a failed business opportunity. He swore on his brother's grave he would never do such a thing again. And I believed him, Maggie. I had to believe my son wasn't a murderer. I got up from the table, staggering, holding onto the wall to keep from falling. Everything I believed about my family, my surviving son, and the last 25 years of my life was a carefully crafted lie. Did he pay the money back? I asked. But I already knew the answer from the devastated expression on Robert's face. Never. Not a single penny. In fact, he continued stealing. I pretended not to notice because confronting him would have meant admitting that I covered up Thomas's murder. I became his accomplice, Maggie. Every time I stayed silent, every time I ignored our bank accounts slowly emptying, I became more deeply complicit in his crimes. The horrific reality crystallized in my mind with perfect and terrifying clarity. That's why he's so obsessed with controlling our finances right now, I said. Not because he cares about us, because he wants to finish the job he started 25 years ago. Robert nodded seriously. There's one more thing, Maggie. Something I discovered a few weeks ago. What else could it be? I asked, feeling my heart couldn't bear any more truth. Robert walked over to his desk and pulled out the documents he had hidden under the others. Bank statements, business records, legal papers. I was secretly investigating Owen's financial situation. The furniture restoration business isn't doing as well as he's been trying to convince us. In fact, he's on the verge of bankruptcy. He owes over $130,000 to various banks, suppliers, and private credit institutions. As I read these devastating figures, the papers trembled violently in my hands. Owen was not the successful businessman he appeared to be. He was a desperate, failed con artist who had lived for decades on lies and stolen money. Does Claire know all this? I asked, remembering her sweet smile and warm hugs. I'm absolutely certain she does, Robert replied. When we talk about our money, I've noticed she strategically steers the conversation. She asks specific, calculated questions about our savings, property values, life insurance policies. These aren't innocent questions, Maggie. These are questions asked by someone calculating exactly how much our deaths are worth. That sentence froze my blood. Our deaths, I whispered in horror, repeating it. It was the first time I had considered that Owen might want to physically harm us. Until then, I had thought he only wanted to steal from us, to manipulate us. But if he killed his own brother for money, what would stop him from killing his parents for the same reason? Robert, I said, desperately holding his hands, we have to go to the police right away. We have to tell them the truth about Thomas and what's happening now. But my husband shook his head in utter despair, breaking my heart. With what evidence, Maggie? I'm an accomplice to covering up a murder. If I talk now, I'll go to prison too. Besides, who would believe a 63-year-old man who's kept a secret for 25 years? They'll say I'm senile, that I'm making up stories. He was right. The terrible truth was that we were trapped. So are we just going to wait for him to kill us like he killed Thomas? I asked, my voice rising hysterically. We'll be extremely careful, Robert said, trying to sound more confident than he actually felt. We'll find a way to protect ourselves, gather concrete evidence. But his words were cut off by the sharp ring of the phone. It was Owen calling. Hello, Mom, he said in that sweet voice of his, which now sounded completely diabolical to my ears. Claire and I talked, and we thought it would be very special to celebrate your 40th wedding anniversary with something unforgettable. How about taking a walk along those coastal paths you've always talked about on Saturday? We could go for a family walk, take some beautiful photos, and spend a wonderful day together. My blood began to run ice cold through my veins. I looked at Robert, who had been listening to the entire conversation through the speaker, and saw the same look of pure fear on his face. That's a very thoughtful idea, son, I replied in a voice I could barely control. But let's think about it. We'll call you back tomorrow. After hanging up the phone, Robert and I stared at each other in an oppressive silence, both of us knowing we had received a carefully concealed invitation to our own execution. The coastline, I murmured. They'll take us to the cliffs and kill us, making it look like an accident. Robert nodded solemnly, like he did to Thomas at Widow's Peak. We didn't sleep that night. Clinging to each other in bed, We listened to the sound of the waves crashing against the rocks below and desperately planned how we could save ourselves from our own son. The next few days were a complete nightmare. Robert and I had to act completely normal when Owen and Claire came to visit, smiling as we excitedly discussed the hiking trip, nodding as we talked about quality family time. But inside, every cell in my body was screaming with fear. I knew I had looked into the eyes of my eldest son's killers, and now they were meticulously planning to do the same to me and my husband. Claire arrived on Thursday afternoon with a shopping bag and that bright smile that now looked like the devil's mask. "Maggie, dear," she said, hugging me with the arms that would soon push me to my death. "I bought some supplies for our mountain adventure. Nuts, energy bars, fruit, bottled water, everything we need for a perfect picnic." She showed me the contents of the bag like an excited child, but all I could think about was how these items could be used to cover up our crime. "I brought my new camera too," she added, pulling out an expensive digital camera. "I want to capture every precious moment of this special day. These photos will be treasures we'll keep forever." The cruel irony of his words made me physically sick. The only photos he planned to take would be of our mangled bodies lying at the bottom of a cliff, as evidence of a tragic accident for the police. Owen appeared behind him, carrying a brand new hiking backpack. "Dad," he said to Robert with feigned enthusiasm, "I got all the safety gear we need for the hike. Ropes, carabiners, first aid kit, emergency flares, everything." Every word that came out of his mouth sounded like a cruel mockery. Safety equipment to plan our murders. This twisted irony made my head spin. "Isn't this a bit dangerous for people our age?" I asked carefully, searching for any excuse to cancel this death trip. Claire stroked my cheek with that sickeningly fake kindness. "That's why we chose such an easy and well-maintained trail," she convinced me in a teacherly voice. "Even children do this hike regularly. Plus, Owen and I will be right beside you every step of the way." Yes, they would be there until the moment they decided to push us off the cliff. That night, after they finally left, Robert and I sat trembling in our living room, not from the cold, but from the sheer terror we'd been suppressing for hours. "We can't go," I said, clutching his hands tightly. "We can't go. We'll make up an excuse, say we're sick. If we don't go, they will be back here in 1 month," Robert said seriously. "They'll find another way to kill us. Maybe a more convincing way, like our house burning down while we sleep, or a robbery gone wrong. At least on the trail, we know what they're trying to do. We can prepare." His words had a terrifying logic to them, but they weren't comforting at all. "So what do you suggest?" I asked, desperately seeking any solution that might save our lives. Robert thought for a few minutes before answering. "We'll go, but we'll be prepared. I'll hide my phone and set it to record everything that happens. If we somehow manage to survive, we'll have irrefutable proof, and if we don't," his voice broke, "at least someone will finally learn the truth." That Friday night, we could barely touch our dinner. We knew this might be the last meal we shared together in that kitchen, where we had shared so many beautiful moments back when we were still a real family. "I wrote a letter," Robert confessed, pulling a sealed envelope from his desk. "I wrote to your sister Dorothy. In the letter, I explained everything we knew about Thomas's death and what we thought Owen planned to do to us. I hid the letter in our safe. If we don't return from this journey, at least she'll know where to look for the truth." That night, we hugged each other as we got into bed and whispered words of love that could be our last. "If anything happens to me," Robert said, "I want you to know that these 40 years I've spent with you have been the greatest gift of my life. Despite everything, the mistakes, the secrets, the failures, I love you more than my own life." I cried silently, engraving the rhythm of his breathing, the warmth of his body, the familiar scent of his skin, and the smell of workshop wood that always clung to him into my memory. Saturday began with a bright sun, as if mocking our situation. Owen arrived early, whistling a cheerful melody that sent shivers down my spine. Good morning, lovebirds, he called from the front door. Are you ready for your big adventure? Melissa, no, Claire, appeared behind him, as radiant as a bride on her wedding day. But this was a wedding made with death. During the breakfast, we could barely eat. Owen meticulously detailed the hiking route. It's a magnificent trail, he said, spreading a topographical map on the table. It climbs to a viewpoint called Eagle's Point, where you can see the entire coastline. People say the view is breathtaking. His eyes sparkled with devilish excitement. Of course the view would be breathtaking. It would be the last view we would ever see. Some parts of the trail are steep, Claire added, as if offering useful tourist information. But it's nothing you experienced hikers couldn't easily handle. His comment about our supposed hiking expertise felt like a cruel joke. We were two people in our 60s who occasionally walked the trails in our neighborhood. We were by no means experienced hikers. While loading our gear into Owen's SUV, I noticed him meticulously checking his backpack to make sure he had everything he needed for the plan. I saw ropes, a small folding shovel, and something resembling a flare gun. "What's that for?" I asked, pointing to the flare gun with a trembling hand. "A safety precaution," he replied without hesitation. "If we somehow get lost or something goes wrong, we can send an emergency signal." Of course, after pushing us off the cliff, they would send an emergency signal, so our bodies would be found quickly and the accident could be properly confirmed. Everything had been calculated. Every detail had been planned, so our murders would appear perfectly and tragically natural. The journey to the start of the hiking trail took nearly 2 hours, and it felt like an eternity of fear. Claire played cheerful pop music and sang along to the songs as if we were really going on a fun family outing. Owen drove carefully, obeying all speed limits, coming to a complete stop at every stop sign. He didn't want to risk a traffic accident that could ruin the perfect murder plan. During the trip, Robert secretly held my hand, and I felt him activate the voice recording on his phone. From this moment on, everything would be recorded. If we managed to survive, we would have proof. If we didn't, at least the truth wouldn't die with us. When we finally arrived at the parking lot at the start of the trail, my heart was beating so hard I thought it would burst out of my chest. It was a place of breathtaking beauty, towering Douglas firs, the sound of waves in the distance, morning mist still clinging to the forest floor. But for me, this place had become a carefully chosen location for my own execution. Owen and Claire took their backpacks from the car, smiling and joking, as if this were truly the happiest day of their lives. "Are you ready for the adventure?" Owen asked. And for the first time in 25 years, I saw the same cold gleam in his eyes that I had seen the night he pushed Thomas off Widow's Peak. The trail started deceptively easy, winding gently through the old coastal forest, where the morning sun's rays filtered through the canopy. Claire walked ahead, constantly taking photos and commenting on every detail of the scenery with forced enthusiasm. "Look at those incredible ferns," she exclaimed, pointing to the giant sword ferns lining the path. "And that tree, it must be hundreds of years old. Nature is so magnificent, isn't it?" Her performance was flawless, the loving bride spending a precious day with her elderly mother-in-law. If I didn't know the truth, I would have believed every word, every gesture, every fake smile. Owen walked behind us, supposedly to prevent us from falling behind or struggling. But I could feel his piercing gaze on our backs like twin lasers. Whenever I turned to look at him, he would flash that smile he had perfected over 25 years of deception. "How are you, Mom, Dad?" he would ask with feigned concern. "Would you like to stop and rest? There's no need to rush." After about an hour of steady walking, we began climbing a particularly steep section of the path. My legs were already heavy and weak, and Robert was struggling to breathe. We weren't used to this kind of physical exertion, and our killer children knew this very well. They had chosen a route that would wear us out physically, so that when they put their plan into action, we would be defenseless. "We're approaching Eagle's Point," Claire said cheerfully. But according to the trail map I had studied at home, we still had at least 45 minutes of walking ahead of us. Her lie confirmed that they had no intention of reaching the actual viewpoint. The place where they planned to kill us must be much closer. During the walk, I tried to memorize every detail of the path, every distinctive tree, every unusual rock formation, every landmark that could serve as a reference point if I somehow managed to survive and had to explain to the police exactly where everything was. Robert was doing the same, and occasionally we exchanged glances filled with horror and determination. We knew we were deliberately walking toward our own deaths, but we also knew this was our only chance to gather the evidence needed to expose our killers. "Oh my God, look over there," Claire suddenly shouted, pointing to a dramatic rock formation rising dramatically to our right. "That rocky face has an incredible view. Why don't we climb up there and take a truly special anniversary photo?" My blood ran cold. There it was, the place they had chosen for our execution. The cliff was about 85 feet above the main trail and could only be reached via a secondary path that looked far more dangerous than the route we were following. The rocks looked loose and unstable. There were fewer trees to grab onto if someone stumbled, and from the top, I could see a steep cliff plunging into a deep valley filled with jagged rocks and twisted vegetation. "I don't think this is a good idea," I said, trying to sound concerned rather than scared. "That path looks quite dangerous for people our age." But Owen, with his backpack full of safety equipment that I knew he had no intention of using to rescue us, had already started walking determinedly toward the return path. "Come on, Mom," he said, using the tone of voice he used to convince me of things when I was a kid. "It'll only take 15 minutes. Besides, Claire is absolutely right. The photos taken from there will be amazing. You'll thank us later." The word amazing made every hair on my body stand on end. The photos would be amazing for anyone who saw them as evidence of our tragic accident. Robert squeezed my hand carefully and reminded me that his phone was recording every word, every moment. We had to keep going. We had to see this through to the end, to gather the evidence we desperately needed. If we refused now, they would find another opportunity, another place, another detailed excuse to kill us. Climbing to the top of the cliff was really hard. Slippery rocks slid dangerously under our feet, and I almost fell backwards several times. But the scariest thing was realizing how perfect this place was for murder. If someone accidentally slipped and fell off the cliff, their chances of survival would be almost non-existent. And most importantly, there would be no witnesses. "We're almost there," Claire shouted from above, reaching the summit with the agility of someone who had explored this route before. This was no accident. It was a carefully planned expedition. Owen quickly followed her, then reached down to help Robert and me complete the final dangerous meters of the climb. His hands gripping my arms felt like vulture claws. The view was truly breathtaking. From there, you could see the entire coastline, the Pacific Ocean stretching to the horizon, the waves crashing against the sea cliffs far below, the eagles soaring on thermal currents. Under other circumstances, it would have been a magnificent moment to share with this family. But knowing what I knew, this place looked like nature's perfectly designed execution chamber. "Come here for the photos," Claire directed, positioning herself near the edge of the cliff. "I want the ocean and the coastline in the background. This will be absolutely perfect." Robert and I approached slowly, each careful step bringing us a little closer to our ultimate goal. I could see Owen strategically shifting his position behind us, calculating angles, measuring distances with his eyes. This was it. The moment they had been planning for months had arrived. "Perfect position," Claire exclaimed excitedly, raising her camera. "Now wrap your arms around each other and smile sincerely." Robert and I, probably for the last time in our lives, embraced each other, while he took one photo after another. Each flash of the camera was like lightning announcing the deadly storm about to descend upon us. "Take one more," Owen said, moving closer behind us. But step back a bit so we can fit more of this amazing view into the frame. Taking a step back meant standing on the edge of the collapsing cliff. Robert and I looked at each other one last time. The moment had come. There was no time for acting or delaying. Following the instructions, we took a step back, feeling the solid ground beneath our feet disappear, leaving only empty air and the deadly cliff behind us. Claire raised the camera one last time, but this time I saw something fundamentally different in her expression. The mask had completely fallen away. There was no need to play a role anymore. "Smile," she said in a voice that was no longer sweet, cold, mechanical, completely devoid of humanity. "This will be the last photo you take together." At that very moment, Owen lunged toward us, arms outstretched. The plan was ruthlessly simple. Push us back into the void, take photos of the accident scene, then descend to find our shattered bodies and call for help. But Robert had mentally prepared himself for this very moment. At the last second, he grabbed Owen's wrist and pulled him forward with astonishing strength. "If we're going to die," he shouted with a fury I'd never seen in our 40 years of marriage, "you're coming with us, you murderous bastard." For a moment, the four of us dangled precariously over the edge of the cliff, clinging to each other in a terrifying dance between life and death. Claire screamed and lunged forward to help Owen, but the combined weight of all of us was far too much for the collapsing edge to bear. I felt the ground beneath my feet completely collapse, sensing gravity's inevitable victory. And then the four of us fell to the ground, caught in a deadly embrace, screaming as the wind rushed past us and the rocky ground approached at a terrifying speed. In those seconds that felt like an eternity, I thought of Thomas. I thought of how he might have felt in his final moments when Owen pushed him off Widow's Peak 25 years ago. I thought of the life Robert and I had built together, our grandchildren who would grow up without us, all our dreams that would die with us on these rocks. The impact was brutal. I heard the sickening sound of bones breaking, mine or Robert's, I couldn't tell. The pain was so intense and all-consuming that my brain couldn't process it properly. Everything turned white, then red, then a kind of gray static. But then I heard Robert's weak but crystal-clear voice. "Maggie, don't move a muscle. Play dead. For God's sake, play dead." And I realized something truly miraculous. I was still alive. The pain was so unbearable that I thought I would lose consciousness. But I tried to resist it with all my willpower. I felt blood running down my face and soaking my clothes. There was definitely something wrong with my shoulder. Was it dislocated? Broken? I couldn't tell. My right leg was throbbing with such intense pain that I wanted to scream. But Robert's command echoed in my ears like a divine decree. Play dead. With a willpower I didn't know I possessed, I remained completely still, controlling my breathing until it was almost imperceptible. I kept my eyes open, but didn't focus, didn't look at anything. A few meters away, I could hear Owen and Claire's agonized moans. They had also survived the fall, but from their pained voices, it was clear they were in much worse shape than we were. "Claire," I heard Owen's hoarse voice. "Claire, are you okay? Talk to me." His concern for his wife made me sick to my stomach. This man, who had killed his own brother and tried to kill his parents, could still feel love for someone. "I think my leg is broken," Claire moaned, her voice filled with genuine pain. "It hurts so much, Owen. What about the old people?" His disrespectful and emotionless attitude toward us confirmed everything I already knew. We were never a family to him. We were just obstacles between him and his money. I heard a movement, Owen crawling across the rocky ground toward where Robert and I lay motionless. My heart was pounding so hard that I was terrified he would hear it, and our lie would be exposed. "They're both dead," he announced, after what felt like hours, but was probably only a few minutes. Both eyes open, but not breathing, no pulse. His lie filled me with a strange, helpless hope. If he believed we were dead, maybe, just maybe, we had a chance to survive. "Perfect," Claire whispered, with a satisfaction that froze my blood despite the circumstances. "It went exactly as planned." Well, except for the part where we fell, Owen replied with a bitter, sorrowful laugh. This wasn't supposed to happen. At least, Claire said, and I could hear a cruel smile in her voice, we won't have to pretend to love them anymore. God, I'm so tired of playing the faithful bride. For what felt like an eternity, Owen and Claire discussed their situation in voices I occasionally heard in my consciousness. Both were injured, but well enough to crawl. Their new plan was to drag themselves to a place where they could get a cell phone signal, call for emergency help, and then tell the carefully rehearsed story about the tragic accident that killed their beloved mother-in-law and father-in-law. Remember the story exactly, Owen said to Claire, his voice taking on a rehearsed tone. We were taking anniversary photos when a rock under my father's foot shifted. Dad stumbled and grabbed Mom as he tried to steady himself, pulling her down with him. We desperately tried to help them, but we all fell together. We are the traumatized survivors of a horrific family tragedy. I know the script, Claire replied irritably. We rehearsed it hundreds of times. Poor us, we lost our dear mother-in-law and father-in-law in such a terrible accident. We are devastated, utterly heartbroken. Her acting was so convincing that if I hadn't lived through the truth, I would have believed every word of her performance. Slowly, their voices faded away as they crawled and dragged themselves toward the place they hoped would be their salvation and our funeral. When silence finally filled the valley, only the distant sounds of birds and the wind rustling through the trees could be heard. Robert whispered my name so softly, I could barely hear it. Maggie, are you really okay? I replied in the same way, barely audible, confirming that I was alive but severely injured. My left leg is definitely broken, Robert said, his voice tense with pain. And I think at least 2 of my ribs are broken, maybe more. How are you? I carefully scanned my body and my mind. There was a sharp pain in my right arm and shoulder. My head throbbed as if someone were hitting it repeatedly with a hammer. There was definitely something wrong with my leg. But I was breathing, my heart was beating. I was alive, and that was much more than I had hoped for. We're in bad shape, I whispered. But we're alive. Does your phone work? I heard a rustling sound as Robert checked his pocket. It's here, but it's completely shattered. I don't think it recorded anything useful. The screen is ruined. This was the most frightening part of our situation. We were alive, but we were trapped at the bottom of a valley, badly injured, with no way to communicate with the outside world, and nothing to prove what had actually happened. Robert, I whispered helplessly, before it's too late, before we lose consciousness or worse, I want you to tell me everything. Everything that really happened the night Thomas died. No more secrets. No more lies. My husband took such a deep breath that it was as if his soul was leaving his body, taking with it 25 years of suffocating guilt. That night, he began, his voice broken with both physical and emotional pain, Thomas came to find me in the workshop around 6:30. Maggie was furious. I had never seen her so angry in my life. She was holding papers, bank statements, transaction records, photocopies of checks. Robert paused, and I could hear he was struggling to breathe, probably because of his broken ribs. She showed me irrefutable evidence that Owen had been systematically stealing money from our accounts for at least 8 months. At first, small amounts, $40 here, $75 there, but then increasingly larger sums, $200, $500. Thomas was investigating because he noticed discrepancies in our savings while helping you balance your checkbook that summer. The physical pain coursing through my broken body mingled with the emotional anguish of hearing this truth, buried for a quarter of a century. Thomas wanted to confront Owen that night, Robert continued, his voice tinged with regret. I desperately tried to calm him down, to convince him to wait until morning. But he was determined, his anger justified. He said he couldn't sleep another night knowing his little brother had stolen from his own parents. And you followed him? I whispered, though I already knew the answer. I followed him because I was genuinely afraid of what might happen. I knew how Thomas reacted when betrayed, and I had noticed something increasingly disturbing about Owen. The coldness in his eyes, the calculated nature of his movements, something that sent primitive warning signals to my brain. Robert's breathing grew labored, and I feared he might slip into unconsciousness. When I finally reached Widow's Peak, he continued with difficulty. I found them shouting at each other in a way I'd never heard before. Thomas was holding the papers and waving them like a weapon in Owen's face. "You're a damn thief," he yelled. "You're stealing from your own parents, who sacrificed everything for us." My heart began to race as I pictured the scene. My two sons standing in the dark, one accusing, the other cornered. Owen denied everything at first. He said Thomas was crazy, paranoid, making things up out of jealousy. But Thomas had documents, Maggie. Irrefutable, concrete evidence. What happened next? I asked, but my instincts told me I didn't want to know. Robert was silent for so long that I thought he'd lost consciousness. Then he spoke in a voice so broken it barely sounded human. Thomas told him that if he didn't bring back every penny he stole and confess everything by the next morning, he would tell us himself and go to the police if necessary. Owen went completely mad. He started shouting that Thomas had always been the favorite child, that he had always had everything handed to him, that it was time for things to change and for him to get what he deserved. "Then what happened?" I whispered, my tears streaming down my face, mixing with the blood flowing from my wounds. Then Owen pushed him. It wasn't an accident, Maggie. I saw it with my own eyes from where I was hiding among the trees. Owen deliberately pushed Thomas with both hands, putting all his weight behind it. Thomas desperately tried to keep his balance. I can still see him flailing his arms, searching for something to hold on to. But there was nothing, just empty air and gravity. The picture Robert painted was so vivid and terrifying that I felt like I was witnessing my son's murder all over again. "Why?" I asked, my voice rising despite the danger. "Why didn't you ever tell me the truth? How could you keep this from me for 25 years? Robert's sobs echoed through the valley, a voice so pure with pain, it didn't sound human. Because when I went down to where Owen was standing over Thomas's body, he was shaking uncontrollably, crying hysterically, and repeating, "It was an accident, Dad. I swear it was an accident. He attacked me, I pushed him, and he lost his balance. I didn't mean for this to happen. Please, Dad, please help me." "But you knew it was intentional murder," I said, feeling betrayed on a level I hadn't realized existed. "Yes," Robert confessed, his voice echoing in the void. "But he was my son, Maggie. My youngest son was on his knees, begging me not to ruin his life, and Thomas was already dead. There was nothing I could do to bring him back. I thought, may God forgive me for this reasoning. I convinced myself that this was partly an accident, that Owen had learned the most terrible lesson possible, that this tragedy would make him a good man." "What about the stolen money?" I insisted, wanting to know every detail of this nightmare. "Owen promised to pay it back slowly, without anyone noticing. He said he had invested the money in what he thought was a legitimate business opportunity, but the investment had gone horribly wrong. He swore on Thomas's grave that he would never do such a thing again." What a bitter irony. "But he didn't pay back a single penny," I said. "Worse, he kept stealing, Maggie. He kept stealing small amounts of money. I noticed but ignored it, because confronting him would have meant admitting I helped cover up Thomas's murder. With each passing day, I became more deeply complicit in this crime. Every time I saw unexplained withdrawals and remained silent, I chose Owen over the truth, justice, and Thomas's memory. I tried to move slightly to ease the pain in my shoulder and immediately regretted it. The pain enveloping my body was indescribable. "So that's why Owen is so desperate to control our finances right now," I said. "He's not just greedy. He's mired in debt, and we're his only lifeline." "Exactly," Robert agreed. "When I looked into his business records, I discovered he owes money to some really dangerous people, Maggie. Not just banks. Private lenders who don't accept excuses or payment plans. The kind of people who charge bone-crushing interest rates. A terrifying new dimension of betrayal unfolded before me. So, we weren't just annoying obstacles to him, I said. As the whole truth came out, we were his last chance to survive. Our inheritance wasn't just convenient, it was desperately necessary. The only thing standing between his own destruction and us was our deaths, Robert confirmed. Just then, we heard voices echoing from somewhere above us, distant but growing closer. Owen and Claire had managed to find help. Rescue teams would soon arrive, and our killer children would deliver Oscar-worthy performances as the traumatic survivors of a family tragedy. "Robert," I whispered urgently, "what do we do now?" "If they find us alive and realize we heard what they said, they'll find a way to finish us off. We'll keep playing dead," he said in a determined voice. "We'll remain completely still until Owen and Claire, unaware we're alive, secretly contact the authorities. This is our only chance." The sounds were growing louder, now accompanied by the characteristic whirring of helicopter blades cutting through the air. The rescue operation was moving quickly. Owen and Claire had probably presented themselves as distraught family members whose elderly mother-in-law had died in a tragic hiking accident. "They're down there," Owen's voice shouted from above, his tone filled with grief and helplessness. "My family, please hurry. I think they're both dead." His performance was flawless. Had I not known the truth, had I not heard his cold confession a few minutes earlier, I would have believed he was a devastated son who had lost his parents in a horrific accident. "Sir, please calm down," a commanding voice replied, clearly the rescue operation leader. "We are currently preparing for a rope descent. Can you and your wife move?" "I think my wife's leg is broken," Owen replied, his voice trembling convincingly. "I'm also quite badly injured, but please, forget about us, just get to my family." The concern in his voice, the obvious selflessness, was a masterclass in deception. I heard the sounds of rescue equipment being used, ropes being uncoiled, carabiners clicking, boots scraping against the rock surface. Claire, too, played her part perfectly. Her sobs reached me where I lay motionless. "I can't believe this happened," she cried out with genuine pain. "We were just taking pictures. Everything was perfect. Then the rock suddenly collapsed. It all happened so fast. Too fast to do anything." Every word stabbed my heart like a dagger, because I knew she would repeat these lies, exactly to the police, to the journalists, to anyone who would listen to her carefully crafted account of events. The rescue team began descending into the valley. I could hear their voices getting closer, the professional calm of people trained for precisely this kind of situation. "There are 2 victims here," a rescuer shouted upon seeing us. An elderly couple, both appear to be in critical condition. He approached quickly, and I felt his hands checking my pulse on my neck, his ear brought close to my mouth, listening to my breathing. This was the most dangerous moment. I had to slow my breathing down to almost nothing, even though my survival instincts were screaming at me to react, to cry out for help. I had to completely relax my body. "This person's pulse is very weak," he said, pointing at Robert. "The woman's is almost non-existent. Call the medical team here immediately." My heart was filled with hope. They thought Robert was alive, and I was on the brink of death. It was exactly what we wanted them to believe. During the agonizing time that followed, I had completely lost track of time. The medical personnel treated us with professional efficiency. I felt them carefully placing an oxygen mask over my face, checking my wounds with gentle but meticulous hands, securing me to the backboard and then to the rescue stretcher. Throughout this entire time, I had to fight against every human instinct urging me to open my eyes, ask for help, and notice the people trying to save my life. I heard a paramedic report over the radio. "Male patient is stable. Condition is critical, but no immediate danger to life. Female patient is in very critical condition. Pulse is barely detectable. Air ambulance to trauma center required immediately." Perfect. They would take us to the hospital, and there we would have the opportunity to speak privately with the authorities, without Owen and Claire stopping us or listening in our conversations. As we carefully climbed the rocky slope on the rescue stretchers, I could hear Claire's theatrical sobs and the comforting words the rescue workers were saying to her and Owen. "You were incredibly brave to get through this," one of them said to Claire sympathetically. "The fact that you and your husband are in relatively good condition is a miracle." If only they knew that the real miracle was Robert and I surviving and uncovering the truth. In the medical helicopter, flying to the regional trauma center, I could feel Robert strapped to the stretcher beside me. The flight medics were intensely focused on keeping him stable, and from their urgent conversations, I gathered his injuries were more serious than mine. For a terrifying moment, I feared he would die before revealing the truth, that the guilt he had carried for 25 years would go with him to the grave. "Ma'am," I heard a flight attendant say directly to me, her voice gentle and close to my ear. "If you can hear me, hang on. We're almost at the hospital. You're going to make it." In his voice, there was genuine compassion, striking a stark contrast to the calculated cruelty I had witnessed from my own family. When we arrived at the hospital, chaos immediately ensued. Doctors and nurses converged from all directions, shouting medical terms I didn't understand, rushing us down corridors under bright fluorescent lights. I was taken directly to the trauma room, and a team immediately began treating my wounds. I had to act unconscious, but at the same time, I needed to find a way to communicate with someone trustworthy, someone who would believe the impossible story I needed to tell. "Doctor," I heard a nurse say anxiously, "his vital signs are unusual. His pulse is stronger and more stable than we'd expect for someone in his condition, and his breathing pattern seems almost controlled." My heart skipped a few beats. They were catching on to my deception. My body was giving away the role I was trying to maintain. "Trauma can cause strange physiological reactions," the doctor murmured thoughtfully. "The body finds mysterious ways to cling to life in extreme situations. Let's continue to monitor him closely. The next few hours will tell us everything." I was admitted to intensive care, hooked up to numerous monitors, surrounded by the constant beeping of machines monitoring all my bodily functions. Robert was nearby. I could hear the medical staff discussing his condition in the next room. "The man's condition is critical but stable," someone reported. "Multiple fractures, internal bleeding, but he's fighting." His wife, however, her condition is mysterious. Considering her fall, she should be showing more serious symptoms. Time passed and lost its meaning. I drifted between conscious awareness and unconsciousness. The painkillers they gave me, making it difficult to maintain the delicate balance between appearing almost dead and staying alert enough to seize every opportunity to uncover the truth. Sometime later, hours later, I don't know, I heard familiar voices approaching my bed. Owen and Claire had been granted a brief visit by the doctors. "Just a few minutes," the nurse said gently. "Both are in critical condition. We're doing everything medically possible." I heard Owen's footsteps approaching my bedside. This was perhaps the most dangerous moment yet. I had to convince the killer son that I was truly dying, that his plan had succeeded. I felt his hand touch mine, the same hand that had pushed me off that cliff, and I had to use all my willpower not to pull away violently. "Mom," he whispered, his voice perfectly calibrated with fake emotion. "If you can somehow hear me, I want you to know I love you. I'm so sorry this terrible accident happened." His words were like poisoned honey, sweet on the surface, but deadly at its core. Claire approached from the other side of my bed. "Maggie, dear," she murmured with feigned tenderness, "you are like a real mother to me. We will never forget you. Never." Liar. The only reason they'd remember me was because they'd have to live forever knowing they'd killed me. But then Owen leaned in close to my ear, his breath touching my skin, and whispered something that froze my blood. "I hope you've finally learned your lesson, Mother. You should never have asked so many questions about our financial situation. Some secrets are meant to stay buried, just like Thomas, just like you. At that moment, I was absolutely certain our plan had worked. Owen had just confessed, and there was a nurse in the room who heard every word. Owen's whispered confession echoed in my ears like a death knell, but this time, it was his death knell, not mine. The nurse adjusting my IV line, her name tag read Sandra, was completely frozen. Through my barely open eyelids, I could see her eyes widening in shock and horror. She had heard something she absolutely shouldn't have, and from her expression, I could tell she understood the full meaning of the whispered words. "What did you say about Thomas?" Claire hissed, clearly surprised that Owen had mentioned his long-dead brother-in-law. Owen tensed, immediately realizing he had said too much. "Nothing," he muttered. "I just meant, my mother always wondered about that night. I guess none of that matters anymore." But it mattered. It mattered more than anything. Claire was smart enough to realize her husband had made a terrible mistake. "Owen," she said, her voice choked with panic, struggling to control it. "Let's go. Let the paramedics do their job. We're just getting in the way here." I could sense the tension between them, their mutual understanding that they had revealed too much at the wrong time and in the wrong place. After they left, Nurse Sandra stood frozen beside my bed for a few seconds. Then she leaned toward me and whispered so quietly I could barely hear her. "Ma'am, I know you can hear me. What I just heard wasn't normal. If you're in danger from those people, you need to tell me somehow, right now." Her urgency filled me with a desperate hope. Finally, someone else was beginning to sense the truth. Very slowly, almost imperceptibly, I moved my right index finger. A very small movement, but deliberate. Sandra held her breath slightly. "Oh my God," she whispered. "You're conscious. You're acting." I moved my finger again, this time twice in quick succession. "Listen carefully," he said, lowering his voice and acting as if he were checking the values on my monitor. "If the people who were here just now did this to you on purpose, move your finger 3 times." Without hesitation, I moved my finger 3 times. Sandra stepped back slightly, her face pale. "They tried to kill you." 3 more movements. The nurse moved away from my bed and continued to pretend to check the equipment, clearly thinking about what she had just discovered. I could see an internal struggle on her face, a struggle to decide what to do, who to trust, how to handle this impossible situation. Finally, she leaned in again. "I'll call the head trauma doctor and hospital security, but you must keep up the act until we can properly protect you. Do you understand?" A finger gesture. Yes. The next 20 minutes were pure torture, not just physical pain, but psychological torment too. Waiting, wondering if Sandra would actually do it, if anyone would believe her, if Owen and Claire would somehow discover our lie before we exposed them. Finally, I heard approaching footsteps. This time, there were multiple people. "Miss Sullivan?" A man's voice spoke quietly beside my bed. "I'm Dr. Brennan, chief of the trauma department. Nurse Sandra explained your situation to me. Hospital security is here, and I've also called the county sheriff's office. You're safe now. Can you open your eyes?" Slowly, in pain, I opened my eyes. The bright hospital lights temporarily blinded me, but I gradually managed to focus on the worried faces around my bed. Dr. Brennan, Nurse Sandra, 2 security guards, and a deputy sheriff. "Thank God," Sandra whispered, tears welling in her eyes. I thought I was losing my mind. "Mrs. Sullivan," said the deputy sheriff, stepping forward, "I'm Deputy Sheriff Martinez. Can you tell us what really happened at that cliff?" After hours of forced silence, my voice emerged as little more than a hoarse whisper. "My son, Owen, and his wife Claire pushed us. They tried to kill us. It wasn't an accident. 25 years ago, they killed my other son, Thomas. They planned this. They planned to kill us for our inheritance." The words poured out in a hurried, broken rush, and suddenly I began to sob, all the fear, betrayal, and suffering of the past months pouring out of me. Martinez's face hardened. "Where is your husband right now?" Robert is in the trauma room next door, Dr. Brennan replied. He's also in critical condition, but he regained consciousness about 30 minutes ago. I need to speak with him immediately, said his assistant. And I want both of you to tell me everything, starting from the very beginning. For the next 2 hours, despite my injuries and exhaustion, I told Martinez the whole horrific story. The cover-up of Thomas's murder for 25 years, years of theft, the increasing pressure to hand over financial control, the meticulously planned hiking trip, the deliberately chosen cliff, Owen and Claire's confessions made under the assumption that Robert and I were dead. My husband had recorded part of it on his phone, I said helplessly. Before the fall, he was trying to gather evidence. The phone was completely shattered during the fall. Martinez's assistant said with a sullen expression, "But your statement is very strong, and we have something even better." He explained that the hospital security cameras had recorded Owen whispering his confession at my bedside, not the audio, but the suspicious behavior. More importantly, Sandra's immediate report and my reactive finger movements had been officially recorded. Most importantly, Martinez continued, we'll be placing recording devices on both of you. Your son and daughter-in-law don't know you're aware and conscious. When they visit again, which they will, to maintain the role of the grieving family, we'll record everything they say with high-quality audio. Robert was brought to my room an hour later, still injured and broken, but conscious and determined. Our reunion was tearful. We both silently acknowledged that we had somehow survived the impossible. "Did you tell them everything?" he asked in a weak voice. "Everything," I confirmed. "There are no more secrets, no more protecting Owen." Robert shook his head, tears streaming down his bruised face. "I should have told the truth 25 years ago. I chose to protect one son over bringing justice to the other. This is a sin I will carry to my grave. We'll fix this now," I said, squeezing his hand gently. "For Thomas. Finally, after all these years, we'll bring justice for Thomas." Martinez's assistant returned with small, sophisticated recording devices hidden inside our hospital gowns. The plan was simple. Wait for Owen and Claire's next visit. Let them talk and record their incriminating statements. We didn't have to wait long. The next morning, Owen and Claire returned to the hospital with Emma and Jake. Our innocent grandchildren didn't know their parents were murderers. While the children were kept in the waiting room, Owen and Claire were allowed into our room for a final goodbye. Robert and I lay motionless, on the brink of death, continuing to act as if barely conscious. "I can't believe they're still alive," Claire whispered to Owen as they approached our beds. "I thought they would be dead by now. The fall should have killed them instantly." "It's just a matter of time," Owen replied quietly. "The doctor said both of them have severe internal injuries. Neither of them will make it through the week." "What if they wake up?" Claire asked, panic in her voice. "What if they remember what happened?" "They won't," Owen said with cool confidence. "Even if they regain consciousness briefly, traumatic brain injuries cause memory loss. They won't remember the fall or the events that caused it. And even if, by some miracle, they did remember, who would believe two elderly people with brain damage over our word?" The detached cruelty in his voice, referring to his own parents as two elderly people with brain damage, was perfectly captured by the recording devices. "After they die," Claire said, "how long will it take for us to inherit?" "The lawyers said it would probably take 6 to 8 weeks to settle everything," Owen replied. "Then we'll pay off all our debts and make a fresh start. Maybe we'll take the kids to Hawaii to get away from this tragedy." They stood there for a few more minutes, discussing their financial plans for our money, debating whether to sell our house immediately or rent it out for passive income, calculating exactly how much they would earn after paying off Owen's catastrophic debts. Every word was recorded in crystal-clear digital audio. Finally, they left the room, flawlessly maintaining their morning performance for the hospital staff they encountered in the hallway. Martinez's assistant entered our room 30 seconds later, wearing a stern expression of satisfaction. "We got everything," he said simply. He fully confessed that he hoped you would die. He admitted to the financial motives. He made incriminating statements about covering up the truth. combined with your statement and the suspicious circumstances, we have more than enough evidence to arrest them. Do it now, Robert said with surprising force. Before they reach the children, Emma and Jake don't deserve to watch their parents get arrested. But they also don't deserve to spend another minute with the killers. The arrest took place an hour later in the hospital parking lot. Owen and Claire were walking toward their car with Emma and Jake when 4 sheriff's vehicles surrounded them. Owen Sullivan and Claire Sullivan. Martinez's deputy announced formally, "You are both under arrest for attempted murder and conspiracy to commit murder against Robert and Margaret Sullivan. You have the right to remain silent." Robert and I watched the scene unfold from a hospital window 4 floors above. We saw Owen's face go from shock to utter disbelief, then to helpless panic. We saw Claire immediately start crying and protesting, insisting it was all a misunderstanding. As the social workers gently separated our grandchildren from their parents, we saw their frightened and bewildered faces. "It's over," Robert whispered, tears streaming down his face. After 25 years of lies, it's finally over. But it wasn't over. It wasn't over yet. The legal process was an agonizing 8-month ordeal. Robert and I slowly healed from our physical wounds. Broken bones mended, internal bleeding subsided, scars turned into pink lines. But the emotional wounds ran much deeper. During the investigation, detectives reopened Thomas's death. They exhumed his body and found forensic evidence inconsistent with an accidental fall. Defensive wounds on his hands, fracture patterns indicating he was pushed rather than tripped. Robert's statement from 25 years ago, that he witnessed the murder, combined with this new forensic evidence, led to additional charges. Owen was now on trial for both Thomas's murder and our attempted murder. The trial caused a huge media stir. Headlines such as "Son accused of killing his brother and attempting to kill his parents for their inheritance" made statewide headlines. Reporters camped outside the courthouse. Every sordid detail was endlessly dissected on true crime podcasts and cable news channels. When it was my turn to testify, I looked directly at Owen for the first time since his arrest. I saw no sign of remorse, guilt, or awareness that he had done anything wrong. Only cold calculation and barely suppressed anger at the failure of his plan. "Owen," I said from the witness stand, my voice steady despite my heart being shattered, "I don't know who you are, but you are not my son. My son died the night you killed Thomas. What has lived in his place for 25 years is a monster I unwittingly helped create and protect." The jury deliberated for less than 6 hours. Owen was found guilty of first-degree murder for Thomas's death and attempted first-degree murder for what he did to Robert and me. Claire was found guilty as an accomplice and conspirator. Both were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Now, 14 months after that dreadful day at the cliff, Robert and I have begun the process of legally adopting Emma and Jake. They are beautiful, innocent children who deserve to grow up understanding what true love is, not the manipulative, toxic love they received from their biological parents. Every night when I tuck them in, I tell them about their Uncle Thomas, whom they never knew. I tell them about his kindness, his honesty, his dreams of studying marine biology and protecting the ocean he loved. I tell them that good people can sometimes make terrible mistakes, but that the truth is always important, even if it hurts. Emma, who is now 10 years old, recently asked me, "Grandma, do you think our parents really loved us?" I hugged her and chose my words carefully. "I think they loved you as much as their capacity to love allowed," I said sincerely. "But they loved money and themselves more. True love means putting others first, being honest even when it's hard, and never ever hurting the people who trust you." Jake, who is only 7 years old, is too young to fully understand why his parents left. We explain it to him in simplified terms. His mother and father made very bad choices and now have to live somewhere else for a very long time. One day, when he grows up, we'll tell him the whole truth. Robert and I sold our beach house. There were too many ghosts, too many memories poisoned by betrayal. We moved to a smaller house closer to Emma and Jake's school. closer to my sister Dorothy and her family. We are painfully rebuilding our lives. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night, still feeling the sensation of falling into the void, still tasting the blood, still hearing Owen's cold voice whispering that some secrets must remain buried. But then I remember that the truth isn't buried. Thomas finally got justice after 25 years. Owen and Claire will spend the rest of their lives in prison, which is exactly where they belong. Yesterday, Emma brought home a project from school, a family tree she had made herself. At the top she had drawn Robert and me, with branches extending down to her and Jake. On the side, she had drawn a little angel, labeled Uncle Thomas. "Is this okay, Grandma?" she asked excitedly. I never met Uncle Thomas, but I feel like he's still part of our family. I hugged her tightly, tears streaming down my face. "It's even better than that, sweetheart. It's perfect. Uncle Thomas is definitely part of our family. He always will be." That night, Robert and I sat on our new porch. It was smaller than the old one, but comfortable, watching the sunset, holding hands as we had done for 40 years. "Do you think we can be truly happy again?" I asked him the same question I had asked a year earlier, when our world first began to fall apart. Robert gently squeezed my hand. "We're alive, Maggie. The truth is on our side. We have 2 beautiful grandchildren who need us. We have each other. That's no small thing. In fact, it's quite a big thing." He was right. We had survived our own son's attempt to kill us. We had uncovered a cover-up that had lasted 25 years. We had seen justice served for Thomas. And we were rebuilding a family from the ashes of betrayal. This wasn't the life we had imagined. This wasn't the happy ending we had envisioned at Sunday afternoon family dinners. It felt like it belonged to another life. But we were alive. We knew the truth. We had each other. And sometimes, in this broken world, this is the only happy ending we can hope for. 3 years have passed since that terrible day. Emma is a successful middle school student, and, like her Uncle Thomas, is interested in marine biology. Jake has started asking more difficult questions, and we have begun to tell him age-appropriate truths. Last month, the 4 of us visited Thomas's grave together. Emma placed wildflowers on the headstone, just like the coastal wildflowers Robert brought me years ago. "Uncle Thomas," she said softly, "I wish I could have known you. But my grandparents always tell me stories about you. They say I'm brave like you. I'll try to make you proud." Robert and I embraced each other, tears streaming down our faces. Justice had finally been served. The truth had finally come to light, and Thomas's memory would live on in the next generation, not as a tragic accident, but as a crime committed by his own brother. A crime that was finally uncovered and punished. Some families are torn apart by secrets and lies. Ours nearly did too. But we survived. We resisted. We uncovered the truth. And in the end, it changed everything.